Okay, so welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we're diving into some material about this Kancha Gachibowli forest, and our goal is to sort of extract what is at the core of this story, what's going on there.
Yeah. I mean, it is a story, and the sources that you shared with me, they really painted a vivid picture of what Kancha Gachibowli was like. You know, this incredible green space in the middle of what's described as like a bustling tech city, a real center of growth. So you can step into this place and it's filled with trees, lush trees. You can hear birds chirping and you can smell the earth, and no noise of honking cars or dust or anything like that. People actually described it as a place where they could breathe differently.
Yeah, wow.
It's like a little pocket of time that stood still.
So it was a really vital escape then, it sounds like. And that makes the central issue, right, all the more important.
Yeah.
Because this green space, this place of peace, as the source describes it, is slowly vanishing under the name of development. And so that immediately makes you wonder, what kind of progress is this? Is it truly progress? Or is there something else going on here? So that's the tension that we're going to explore for you today, right?
Right. I mean, I think we should start by looking at that transformation itself. Like the source material, it doesn't hold back, right? It describes this change.
Yeah.
And we see a literal replacement, like where there were once trees and the sounds of nature, there's now concrete and glass buildings stretching towards the sky, noise of construction, traffic, roads being built. So it's really a sensory change. The natural world is replaced with the artificial world.
So you see a real tangible loss there. It's the trees turning into concrete. But beneath that, this is where we get to the question of progress. What are we actually gaining in this exchange? What does progress actually mean here? And the source sort of lays out the familiar arguments for this type of development, right? So it's the new malls, it's the promise of these thriving IT parks, residential towers, of course, with all the jobs, investment, all that stuff. So this is like a city modernizing itself, right? The familiar story.
Yeah, but what's really interesting is how the source then challenges us to go beyond those traditional measures of progress.
Right.
It makes you ask, like, what else constitutes our well-being, our sense of well-being?
Yeah.
I mean, what value do we place on things like clean air, the peace that comes from being in a natural surrounding, the pleasure of just hearing birds sing? And, these are things that are hard to quantify and measure in economic terms, but their impact on us is undeniable.
Yeah. Totally. And there's that line in the source that is so powerful. We can't eat money. It's just such a stark reminder that survival depends on a healthy environment. So that brings us directly to this sort of like ecological impact, right? Of losing a forest. And what role did Kancha Gachibowli play in Hyderabad?
Well, that's the fascinating thing here. These forests, they're not just scenery. I mean, they're life support. They're absorbing the carbon. They're releasing the oxygen we breathe. They play a huge role in regulating rainfall, helping to prevent droughts and floods. And of course, the source points out, they're so vital for biodiversity.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just like the variety of all the living things, the plants and the animals and the insects, all calling this forest home. So the consequences of losing that are significant. We talk about rainfall patterns changing, temperatures rising, and this irreversible loss of plant and animal life.
Yeah. It's almost like, if you pull on a thread on a sweater, it's like unraveling, right? The source even suggests, like, losing this forest, you get drier soil, you can get worse flooding, and you really start to see how interconnected everything is and how, focusing solely on these immediate development needs, you might overlook like the longer term environmental costs. So yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the people. Like, what about the people who live there, who have a direct connection to the forest,
Right. So the source tells this really, really poignant story of this man called Ramu Kaka, who had lived near the forest for, I think it's at 60 years. His life was really deeply intertwined with this forest. I mean, he relied on it for firewood, herbs, and fruits. It wasn't just resources. It was a fundamental part of who he was.
Yeah. That feeling of loss and displacement that he described is really powerful. And there's this quote, he said, "They built towers but took away my sky."
Wow.
And you really feel like the cost of this kind of development, right? The sense of losing something irreplaceable.
It really speaks to the emotional cost that doesn't get calculated, doesn't get factored in. And it wasn't just him, right? The source broadens this perspective and tells us about the children who used to play in the mud, the women who, fetched water from clean ponds. And those were all resources that were provided thanks to the forest. So you see these real impacts on communities that aren't always factored into discussions of progress. So the forest, it was a safety net, right? In a way, ecologically and socially. And its removal, it creates a lot of vulnerability.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, what about the wildlife? What about the creatures that called Kancha Gachibowli home?
Yeah, well, the source describes this vibrant ecosystem. There were peacocks, jackals, hundreds of different bird species, bees, snakes. I mean, it was just this thriving biodiversity. But one of the things that stuck out to me was how the source described how those sounds are now fading, replaced by this kind of eerie silence. And that's what really brings home the loss of life. When we destroy a forest, it makes a really good point. We're not just losing trees, we're evicting life. These animals are losing their homes, their habitats are destroyed, and as we know, that can lead to endangerment and really disrupting this natural balance.
Right. And that disruption, it ripples outwards, right? Because the source points out, you can have more mosquitoes now, fewer frogs, drier soil, all these things that are interconnected consequences of losing that biodiversity, the natural controls of a healthy ecosystem. So it reminds us that we share this planet with all these other creatures, and that a loss for them is ultimately a loss for us as well.
Absolutely. And beyond these very tangible impacts, I think it gets really interesting when the source goes into more emotional, intangible losses. I mean, we're talking about a loss of peace, the disappearance of places where people had memories, first dates, walks, places where they could find solace, these places that provided them with quiet and a chance to think. I mean, those are gone now, too.
Yeah. And a forest isn't just a collection of trees, right? It's a landscape of our personal histories, of people's histories. It's a backdrop to important moments in their lives. And the source even touches on that sort of healing power that nature has. I mean, I think we all feel that instinctively, and so losing these spaces, I think it can really impact our mental and emotional well-being. I mean, it's real.
Yeah. It is. And then you think about the future generations, and the question the source asks is, are we leaving them forests or only photographs? And that is so powerful, because what opportunities are we taking away from them to connect with nature? And what experiences will they just never have? It makes us think about legacy beyond just development.
Yeah, absolutely. So given all this, what can we do? What different paths are there? And the source does, thankfully, kind of transition into these potential actions. I mean, there is some sense of hope, which is important. And the first step, as it points out, is simply being aware of what's going on and understanding the impacts.
Right. Yeah. I mean, without awareness, there could be no action. And then from that awareness, it's really interesting. It suggests a few avenues, right? So one is just simply speaking up, making your concerns known, asking those important questions like, why is this deforestation necessary? Who benefits? What are the alternative solutions? I mean, really pushing for transparency and accountability.
Yeah, and it's not just raising concerns. The source actually goes into more proactive solutions, mentioning things like urban forests, right? Embracing sustainable building design, prioritizing eco-friendly planning. It's a vision for a different kind of development. So it is possible to integrate nature and not just replace it. I mean, there are other paths.
Right, and the source also points out the importance of supporting the people who are actively working to protect these spaces. Right, the environmental activists, the local communities, often indigenous people who have these deep ties to the land, and of course the environmental lawyers working within the system, trying to enforce those regulations. Even those small actions, like planting a tree, conserving trees in our communities, can contribute to the bigger change.
Yeah, I think my favorite part was the idea of giving the trees a voice, right? This hypothetical voice, where they say, "We were here when you were born, please don't forget us." And it brings it to this really personal level. It's such a good reminder of how connected we are to nature, to the natural world.
It really does. And that brings us to kind of the end of our dive into this material. And it's natural to feel a range of emotions, I think, when you consider the loss of a place like Kancha Gachibowli. But ultimately, I think the question that the source asks is, what kind of world are we building for the future?
Yeah. And, it's a question for all of us, right? And we hope that by sharing this with you today, that maybe it sparked some new thoughts, some new understanding, maybe a desire to get involved or learn more, because as the source reminds us, it's not too late. If we care enough, we can act, we can make a difference.
And I think the encouragement, is to just take a moment, pause, observe the nature that's around you, and think about what is your role in protecting it. Silence, as the source points out, can contribute to the problem, but our voices, our actions can make a change.
And that's a really powerful thought to end on, I think. These forests might not have a voice in the way we do, but as individuals, we do have that ability to speak up, to advocate, to take action. So thank you for listening to The Deep Dive. We hope that we've given you a clearer picture of what's happening at Kancha Gachibowli and maybe inspired you to look at your own world, your own surroundings a little differently.
Yeah.
So thanks for being here with us today.